All right. I think we've probably got a quorum. A good number of folks are still joining, but I've got just about, I think it's 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So we are going to go ahead and kick things off. We've got a fantastic panel today, and we're going to have them introduce themselves. So before we do that, though, we're just going to remind folks, our focus today is on culture change. And specifically, what we hear a lot from folks is, I understand that I have to change culture to make Agile really stick, to make it work, to get the benefits I'm looking for. But what we hear a lot less of is, how do I actually do that? Is that something only my leadership can do? Are there things that I can do? So that's what we're hoping that our panel is going to help us with today. So before we get into that, I'm going to kick it over to my partner in crime, Bill. And Bill Hocking from Radis Software, and he will briefly introduce himself and Radis, and then we'll jump into the panel.
Thank you very much, Dave. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Bill Hocking. I'm with Radis Software, as you can see from the screen. We are a women-owned small business, been in business for about 14 years. And what's really relevant to this is that we decided a few years ago to build a software tool that would dramatically accelerate an organization's ability to realize the benefits of the Scaled Agile Framework, or SAFe. And so we're real excited about the tool. If you'd like to learn more, there's some information on the next slide about how to get in contact with us. But we're really thrilled about what we're doing with organizations in public sector, private sector, et cetera. So I hope you enjoyed today's session. Again, thanks for being part of it. And please ask questions. We'll be monitoring questions as they come in and putting them out in front of the panel. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Bill. I'll give you the 10-second on Packaged Agile. I'm with Packaged Agile. Our focus is really the U.S. government. And I think the slide sums it up. What we're really trying to do is stop the bleeding, help them, especially on large programs, get things right. We want to stop those big General Accountability Office failures. So we will distribute more information out with the webinar recording. So let's go ahead and just jump in and introduce our panelists. So why don't we start with Kim. Kim, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Dave. My name is Kim Mantello. I am with Scrum Inc., and I work for Jeff Sutherland, and I'm a trainer, a coach, and do all sorts of fun things, specifically with Scrum at Scale.
Fantastic. Rich?
Hello, I'm Rich Naster, and I'm a SAFe Fellow, Principal Consultant, and author.
Yuda?
Yeah, I'm Jutta Eckstein, and I work as an independent coach and consultant. I'm based in Germany. I started off as a developer with XP in 97, 98, then started scaling Agile in 2001, and now focus on company-wide agility.
Wow, long time. All right, and last but not least, Lynn.
Hi, I'm Lynn Kazali. I'm a speaker, trainer, author, and my background's mainly in communication. So I'd say communication collaboration expert. And I was just in the US, in Washington, and one of the keynotes at Agile this year.
Yeah, and if you notice in the background, if you happen to see the moon or some stars behind Lynn, that's because she's in Australia. And she is, well, we appreciate all our panelists. She was kind enough to join us at 1 in the morning Australia time, where she is. So thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
There you
go. So we are going to kick things off with a quick poll, right? We want to hear from you guys in the audience, and you know, really about what you think culture is all about, because this comes up quite a bit. And everybody seems to have a different view about culture. So let me go ahead and launch this poll. And for you guys, our panel, you are more than welcome to answer as well. First question is just, what do we think culture really means? And, you know, we've given some common answers, some common attributes. So take a look through those. You can choose as many as you think are relevant for you. And we'll give you a few minutes to do that. And once you do, Okay, so now we've sort of got an idea of what culture is. What do you see as really the biggest issue with trying to change culture? Some of you probably have a lot of experience with that, and some of you very little. So if you don't have a ton of experience, our panel is going to help fill you in, but list of starter questions about what you think your challenges might be. So the answers are coming in. I'm going to give folks just about, oh, I don't know, another 15, 20 seconds, and we'll see what we come up with. So what does culture mean? And then if we are trying to change culture, what do we think the most challenging aspects of that are going to be? And that's going to help our panel direct some of the questions and understand where they need to take things. All right. So I think we've got, good number of participants. Thank you. We've already got 50-some, 60-some% who have voted. Give folks just another second or two. Definitely appreciate your responses. All right. I know a few of you are still chiming in. Why don't we go ahead and end it though? And you're more than welcome to put in the chat window any other thoughts you have. I'm going to show the results just real briefly, what we came up with. What does culture really mean? Hopefully you can see this on your screen. If not, I'll read it out to you. What's most important to culture change? You know, or I'm sorry, to our definitions. And people believe overwhelmingly it's a lot about how people behave and interact. So we've got a good number of people as well with how they think. Some people think culture is largely static. A little bit more think it's dynamic. And you can just sort of breeze through. I think you can see the rest of these. In terms of what the biggest issues are, it looks like by far the number one, it's about other people. Our management isn't really committed to changing culture. So we want to do it, right? But management isn't committed. So I think that's definitely one of the things, all these frankly, but that's a large one we want to focus on today. What are those tangible things, even if we're not, excuse me, formal leaders, we're not the CEO, the presidents, what can we do? Okay. And with that, why don't we go ahead and jump in and we'll start our poll questions. And let's just start. How about Lynn, since we had you introduced last, we'll let you go first. Why do you think culture change is so important for good Agile in the first place?
I think it's about that saying, this is how we do things around here. And so it really is embedded in the everyday, and it can be as simple as the everyday of, you know, how a meeting runs or how someone speaks to someone else, you know, the focus on psychological safety at the moment. Well, there's focus out there might not be in the workplace. So it's these fundamental things, the everydays, if they're not starting to align with some of the things that are Agile, then getting into more advanced or more, you know, masterful aspects of Agile will be a little harder. So it is looking at some of the day-to-day things that we can look at influencing.
Okay. And I'll throw it out to the panel. Rich, how about you? Is it true, do you even agree with the premise? Is culture change really, really essential to do Agile, to become Agile, to improve our agility?
Yeah, I think it is one of the most essential elements of being Agile is to change the culture. After all, being Agile is really more of a mindset than it is about principle, than about practices. You know, it's more about people's thinking and how they do things. It's the way we do things around here. And in order for Agile to work, we have to change people's mindsets, and that requires a completely different culture than most of us are used to, where it's often a command and control culture, and that doesn't do too well with Agile, as we all know.
Yeah, okay, excellent. Well, it sounds like no huge disagreement there. Then let me ask you, Kim, let me throw it to you. You know, it's pretty amorphous, right? People tell me I need to change culture. Fantastic, it's really important. And then they stop the sentence at that point, and I don't know what to do. How would Scrum tell them to proceed?
So kind of adding on to what Richard said, it's really becoming Agile and not just doing the Agile stuff specifically in Scrum. Jeff Sutherland will even tell you, if I go through and do the 3 roles, 5 events, and have the 3 artifacts, you can do cargo cult Scrum or cargo cult Agile, and you're not actually making any improvement. So we have to take the values, whether it's the Scrum values or just looking at the Agile manifesto values and from the basic perspective, and really start to embody those things. From an individual perspective, I think taking those values and starting to embody them, having complete transparency, being open and respectful with the people that we're working with. And as Len was even talking about, creating that psychological safety so that we can say, what are the problems that we have, whether it's within our specific team or even looking out broader within our organization, and having a way to nicely, respectfully articulate that and say, hey, whether it's my team or broader within my leadership team, how can I show you that we could be more effective and we could do better stuff? Here's a solution, and not just whining about it.
Okay, excellent. Well,
I know Yuta.
You have some thoughts?
Yeah, actually, I'm always getting nervous when I hear we need to change culture, because I think there isn't really such a thing as changing culture. I'm sorry. I know I'm on that panel right now. I think culture is something that emerges. It's not something that we change or anyone change or whatever, neither from really within nor, and definitely not from the outside. And so I really like especially the answer of your first question, because that's absolutely my experience as well, that culture is, well, my terminology is really the behaviors and habits that we are seeing and that we are showing. And when we change the behaviors, and then after some time the behaviors will become our second order nature habits, then we will have a different culture implemented. But it's not that we, I don't know, start there and say, okay, let's start changing culture. That's not working, and definitely not by coming together in a workshop and coming up with cool values and stuff and say, okay, let's implement those values. No.
Okay. So look, let me repeat back, and I'll throw it over to maybe to Lynn. I think part of what I'm hearing, or at least Yuta's view, is that, deliberate culture change, and Yuta, correct me if I'm wrong, is almost a misnomer. What we need to do is think about agility. We need to think about those values and principles, and then we need to just take steps towards enhancing our ability to act on those, and culture just emerges. Is that something you agree with, or what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't think it's something that you flick the switch and say at 4 p.m., on the 28th of September, we're going to be agile. Doesn't happen like that. But we could, by the 28th of September, let's say, get closer. Let's start getting closer to our customers, for example. Maybe some people are prevented from interacting with customers or don't have any information about what customers are valuing or needing. So that could be one thing that we could start doing, is finding out how is what we're currently doing landing with our customers, and what could we do to get closer to them and find out what are some of the other problems we could be solving for them. So that's starting to be a behavioural change that could really deliver some awesome information to an organisation. So that's something I'll often start doing, is finding out, well, how close are you to putting the customer at the centre of your world? Why don't we start doing something like that? And that'll head us into the right mindset of thinking about them.
What I actually like about that, what you're saying right now, Lynn, this is something that can scale through the whole company, because it's something that's an important question for every team, whatever they are working on, whatever they decide upon. For example, in their retrospective, how does this impact us serving and helping our customer? But also, if we go then maybe to the top, to the board of directors, for whatever decisions they are making, they can as well ask that question: how does what we want to decide upon right now impact our customers? And is it more for the better or for the worse? And then also reflecting on this, so it can be used as an alignment throughout. And well, Dave, you were always looking for like the small steps and really practical. And I think this is really something, because you can do this no matter where you are in the organization.
First, though, Rich, maybe I'm just crazy. Talking about focusing on the customer, I mean, this sounds crazy talk to me. You guys don't do that at Scale Agile, right? You go out and there's something probably more tangible to change culture. Help us out here, Rich.
Yeah, well, I absolutely agree that focusing on the customer is one of the most important things. But I also think in order for us to treat our customers well, the first thing we need to do is to treat our employees well. And we have to create and foster a culture. I agree with Yuta that culture just doesn't, you just can't make culture happen, but you can foster and create an environment for the kind of culture that you want to happen, emerge over time. And so having the values of being customer centric is really important. Often the type of company it is kind of permeates that throughout the culture. So there's many organizations who are really just focused on the customers, and that permeates for everyone wanting to serve the customer. I was recently on Qatar Airlines, and I was just amazed at the customer service that they provided. I mean, and their slogan is that we're the #1 airline in the world, and it's based upon their customer service. And you can see just how they behave and act because of that is simply amazing. And there's dozens and dozens of examples of companies who have purposely made being customer centric part of their organization's DNA. And I think that does have a way of permeating throughout the whole organization, because we are also customers of each other, as we're working on a team and across teams.
I mean, that sounds great. I'm not going to lie, Rich. This is a lot simpler than I thought. So, culture change can be as simple as, and you guys challenged me on this, I think I'm hearing a lot of agreement. Culture change can be as simple as choosing a value, focus, like looking at the customer, and then maybe, like Lynn said, maybe measuring where you're starting from, right? So how happy are your customers today? Maybe you segment them a little bit. And then figuring out, look, here are some specific activities we're going to carry out to do a better job of our customer. I think I'm hearing you guys say that changes culture by itself. True, Kim and Tello?
Yeah, I think just picking one of those areas and then figuring out how do you start to get that through the organization. I know the focus of this was like from a specific individual and not necessarily at the CEO or the board level, but just by taking one of those things and saying, how can we be more open? How can we be more courageous? How can we put, our customers at the center? If we have even specific individuals who are focused on that, they'll start to spread that to their teams, and then it can scale through the organization. And I really like to see when we've got teams who are actually causing an agile transformation within an organization, because people have said, hey, look at what they're doing. They're having fun, they're treating people with respect, and they're delivering really awesome stuff for our customers. And that's how we start to see how these things start to spread. And then, as Yuta said, it's not just, hey, we're going to flip the light switch, and Lynn as well. Here are some things that we're seeing that are working. How do we start to spread some different things within the organization, and maybe treat people a little bit differently, and hopefully empower them a little bit more, and make it so that people want to come to work more and they feel more valued.
Excellent. Let me throw it over to Lynn real quickly. Lynn, you have thoughts?
Yeah, just an example of I was working with a leadership team, not the most senior in the organisation, but a team that had got together, working for the rail network here in Melbourne, so the train operators. And so we sent the staff down into the metro to go and interact with customers, and they had a series of questions. Like some of them were like, oh, what's going to happen when I start talking to travelers? You know, what are they going to say to me? But this was part of the exercise of going, well, go get closer to them and ask them, how's their journey going today? What would they like, you know, to experience with the rail network? So the leadership team, 100 of them, went off to a number of stations and did that. And then they came back. And we had an incredible list of things, grouped them and started to look at just some of the things they'd quickly gathered that they could start working, solving and responding to. And that was already starting to shift. Is this how we might be able to put the customer at the centre and make some changes that respond to them in quicker ways than we have before?
Excellent. Okay, before we go to, we're going to go to audience questions in just a second. Let me just throw it out though. Yuta, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, I think the way you summarized it, Dave, was what I would say is actually maybe a practice which is described on a meta level. So we call this at the moment probing. Some people might more refer to this as experimenting. So looking at what is your current situation? What is the hypothesis you are having? And then starting to run an experiment where you measure, does it validate or invalidate your hypothesis? And then you go to the next round. And so this was kind of how you summarized it using different words. And then the example we were just circling around right now was, what are the different ways how you can, for example, be more customer-centered? And there are definitely other things you can approach and look at, but it's always, I think, around this concept of probing, which is, doing experiments, but thinking about a hypothesis and measuring it. Why are you shaking your head, Dave?
Well, I got to tell you, because what you just described sounds a lot like what we do in Agile, right? I mean,
oh my goodness, no.
And it's blowing my mind.
Like
so we come up with a hypothesis. We kind of explore that a little bit, figure out what we need to do to test it. We throw something out there, we test it, and then we revise. We iterate. And again, I had never honestly thought about it in culture change in the context of what we do every day in Agile. So probably most of the people who are on this webinar are largely doing some level of Agile in their practice and their life. So part of what I like about what you said is just it relates it back to there. So maybe that's a good stopping point, though, for us to throw it over to Bill real quickly. And Bill, I know you've been looking at audience questions. Is there something related to what we've been saying that you think would be a great question to throw out to our panel?
Well, yeah, in a sense, I think Yuta partially answered a question from one of the participants, from Jeff Goodhue, and he was really looking for some perspective on various folks from a sociological and anthropological perspective that talk about culture change. And this is how you change cultures from a social perspective and that perspective as well. And he was interested to see, if any of the panelists have actually spoken or worked with experts and leaders, thought leaders in those spaces about how they've seen culture change, retain itself, so to speak. He was interested in seeing how the effect of those kinds of thought leaders in terms of their best practices. So besides Yuta, you mentioned that you've studied a number of these folks. Has anybody, talked to or studied any of the known sociological and anthropological leaders as relates to culture?
No, but I've spoken to psychologists about change, and I think that they have a pretty good perspective on this. And really, in order for that cultural change to happen, it's all about how we act and how we behave. And that's what I love about Agile, the whole lean and Agile movement. It provides us with the values and the principles and different thinking tools to change our mindsets. And that leads to behavioral change. And culture always comes last. It's a result of the changes in the way we think and the way we act. And I think that when we look at changing an entire organization, that could be difficult, but we can, if we look at things from an anthropological viewpoint, we can look at maybe changing a tribe at a time. You know, I know that it can be frustrating waiting for the leaders to change something, but we all end up working in some kind of tribe, in a team of teams. You know, if you're talking about Spotify, they would have a tribe. In SAFe, we call that an Agile release train. So I think we as a train or team of Agile teams, just to make it more generic, can really decide about what are the values, what are the principles that we're going to follow, how are we going to work together as a single team in order to accomplish our mission and vision. And I think that's really important too, is having a vision for what do we want our culture to be? What is the worst behavior that we will tolerate within our tribe?
Excellent. So let me throw that to you, Kim, because I think Scrum, there's a little bit about building high-performing teams, right? Something I think Jeff would probably say he's been working on for the last 40 or 50 years. So do you guys agree with that we can start this at the team level?
Yeah, I think that, yes, you can definitely make changes from the team level and that can start to go up. We do also highly advocate for having it being impacted from the leadership level, where we often run into the biggest problems. Some people might get angry about what I'm about to say, but the middle management sludge, the frozen middle layer, that's where we're generally running into the most problems. So being able to attack it both from the bottom, the people who are doing all of the really great work, and the people who are saying, hey, if you want me to work here and to remain relevant, then I need to have these things change. I need to be more empowered. And then also from the leadership team. So kind of attacking it from both areas helps us with making those changes. And from our perspective, kind of going back to the question, you know, looking at a number of different models, whether it's the Delaney, Cotter, the Heath brothers, kind of taking all of those different things and pulling them together and saying, what makes the most sense for the context and the organization that I'm in? And from an individual, it's having the courage and starting to address some of those things that you feel like aren't helping the overall organization from a culture perspective. But yes, Jeff really cares about hyper-productive teams. And we know that we can't really make the biggest impact without having some leadership buy-in on that.
Absolutely. We need to have both a top-down and a bottoms-up approach. In fact, the quickest way to affect organizational change in terms of our culture is from the top. The leaders have to really be engaged with this. You know, and the point I was making before was that, you know, we always can't affect the top, but we can also do things at the bottom too. So I think they're both equally important, but I've found without having that top-down support, that culture is very difficult to emerge. You're always fighting against it. And absolutely agree about Cotter. He's one of the gurus that we really think in terms of organizational change management. So, you know, I think his advice is really just spot on, and as well as Dan and Heath.
The Heath brothers.
The Heath brothers.
Yes.
Probably an easy way to say that.
Let me throw it over to Yuta, because I'm getting Yuta a sense, and we love this, right? We don't want everybody to just completely agree. Maybe some respectful disagreement. Do you have a different view on that?
Yeah, so the one thing is, I said in my intro that I started with XP in 97, 98. And that was the time where everything around Agile, which of course wasn't called Agile at the time, started as a guerrilla thing. So it never started from the top. It was always from the developers who started it. However, what also happened then, and I think I heard Kim saying this as well, that, well, then other people around and also above see what's happening there, and they get curious and they see, oh, what's going on? And so it's kind of a wave that's starting. So I kind of feel it's often, well, maybe it's easier if it's like bottom and top, as you were saying, Rich, but I think it's not a necessity. So I think it can start anywhere. And actually, we have here, especially in Europe right now, a good example, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with her. So we have that little girl in Sweden, Greta Thunberg. She just is visiting United Nations, and she created that Fridays for Future, which is about the awareness of the climate change. And well, maybe I have to say that as a side note, I know in the US the climate change doesn't exist, or it's invented by the Chinese. However,
Oh boy.
sorry to say
This
that.
is going to turn into a very different panel any second.
I know. However, what I want to say is this is one little girl, not empowered by nobody, sitting there, and she created a wave, a momentum. So of course, probably it was the right time and blah, blah, blah. So whatever, maybe if it would have started 10 years ago, nothing would have happened. We don't know. But it's, for me, a really great example that you don't have to be at the top for starting any kind of change. And that's also true in companies. And yes, it might be easier, but don't let you be stopped by the fact that you might not be at the top. And we had this at the second question, management is not committed. That's not a reason.
Yes, agreed. And anyone in an organization can be a leader. Leaders are not relegated to the top people of the organization. And I had somebody on my staff who was very influential in past companies. And whatever Eileen said, people would follow her lead. And she was a very influential person. So it's great then when you can give a voice and make sure those people are really being heard. And there could be many influential leaders. I think the problem with the middle and the top at times is, and I think the middle, we have not done a good job in the Agile community over the past several years of really educating our management and even our top leaders in what is the mindsets and behaviors that we need to have high-performing teams and high-performing organizations. And it's kind of unfair for us to make fun of them when we haven't trained them. And I think it's a very important aspect is that we need to train the leaders in the new behaviors and the new ways of working, so they're not out in the cold, and then we expect them to help us when they haven't really been educated on the new ways of working. A lot of these companies.
And I think it's not only about training, although this gives probably all of us money, but it is about what's in it for the individual.
Yeah.
That's what it is about. It's not about training and whatever, but that they understand what's in it for them. And the way we often talk about it, it sounds like there's nothing in it for them.
Okay. Let me break in real quick because I want to throw it over to Lynn real quickly because you've been quiet over there. Again, this whole idea, it's very empowering, right? You do a lot of facilitation. I want to ask you about this whole bottoms-up approach because, at least originally, there's no question, it sounds like it's easier, right? If we've got leadership at the top and people at the bottom and everybody agrees we want to do this. But, what are your thoughts? Do you think this can happen bottoms up?
Yeah, I've certainly worked with several teams who were wanting to make something different happen. And one of the things they started with was let's make visible the work we're actually doing. So instead of it being hidden in their computing systems, they said, let's start putting some stuff up on the windows and walls, right? What a shock. The building management says you're not allowed to put anything on the windows and walls. So here's, some of the rules. But what we ended up doing was creating some hanging visual artifacts, which was using sense making, was to say, here's what we're working on, here's why we're doing it, here's who we're doing it for. And we just created these through some meetings, some small team meetings, mapping out information, hand-drawn. And what this did was start to radiate information out, but also draw people in as they'd walk through that area. They're going, what are you doing? Ah, is that what it is? So this information was starting to, draw people into how they were working differently, rather than relying on email or broadcasts or boring leadership rollouts of 176 slide decks. These were some simple flip charts on walls that really started to shift. It was a real kind of revolution that started in that part of the business. And the next team next door, they said, hey, we can do that too. And then there were donuts for morning tea. And the next thing you know, this message is starting to flow throughout that floor. And then the other levels of the building are going, what are you doing there? Mm-hmm. And it started to then go that way. It's great. Excellent. Great experience.
Thank you, Lynn. I think I saw, Kim, did you have something? And then we'll go to audience questions.
Yeah, I just to add on to that, even getting people who said, hey, I feel like I'm kind of being a Scrum Master, or just start to create their own lunch and learns, creating a community saying, hey, we're going to talk about this topic. If you guys want to, bring your lunch, let's come and talk about it. And that starts to spread. So having communication and sharing some of the things that are working well as well as some of the things that don't work well, and building that community will help to start to spread, how people are working together as well.
Okay, excellent. I mean, I'll just throw out, before we go to audience questions, part of what I love, again, I think both Bill and I are very passionate about making this tangible. And a lot of what you're talking about, even if I'm not in charge, sounds like something I can do. I can influence my team. I can make big visual information radiators. I can talk to my customers and figure out, how are we doing? How do they think we're doing? And then we can make a plan to adjust. And I can kind of use Agile principles to do all those things. Again, very tangible, which I think was our hope in this, and I love. So Bill, let me throw it over to you real quickly. Any other audience questions? What does our forum think about this?
Well, there's a lot of agreement, I think, from a number of people that have weighed in on some of the comments that the panelists had made. A gentleman named Joe Zahn had an interesting comment. He had to drop off, but his comment was really, I think, kind of poignant. And he basically said, I'm going to read it. He said, to change culture, you need to move from one culture to another. In order to do that, you got to give people the opportunity to experience things in new ways, new experiences, because when they do, it creates a belief change that can result in behavior change, which tends to result in actions that move an organization in a different way. So, the idea of just creating and enabling an environment where you can have different kinds of experiences, and some of which are going to take root and some of which may not, but that tends to change people's behavior. And the other thing that another panelist sent in was, metrics change behavior. So if you really want to change a culture in some ways, if you change how people are paid and remove obstacles in a way that prevents them from doing those things, watch kind of what happens. So is it that simple? Usually not. But if you really want people to change in a certain way, clear as to what that looks like, if you change their compensation plans in some ways, that tends to change metrics pretty quickly.
Excellent. Well, let me throw that to, I see Kim. Kim, let me throw it to you. What do you think about that, the metric?
Absolutely. So changing how people are incentivized and how they get their next promotion, or how they get paid, or where they get to sit, definitely has a huge impact. And so often people say, oh, well, I'm incentivized to be a specialist, or I'm incentivized to act in this specific way. Well, I need HR to change those policies. But you can work with your managers. Most companies don't have policies that say it has to be individual based, whatever your annual performance reviews are. How can you start to get, even from a manager perspective, to them to think about how do we incentivize the team? It doesn't have to be HR at the corporate level. Managers can start to make those changes, and you within a team have the ability to have those conversations and say, hey, how do we feel about this? Is this something that we're willing to take to our immediate leadership? So I've had the opportunity of working with a number of HR people, and sometimes it's like, hey, this isn't as hard as what a lot of people make it out to be. We can start off easy with a specific group and have them just change whatever their performance goals are for an annual basis, and then, pilot it, do that whole hypothesis thing that I think I heard a little bit something about, and then see how that works for, the organization if people want to move forward with that.
Excellent. Rich, I think I saw you next. You have some thoughts?
Yeah, I to build on what Kim was saying, I think a very important area of cultural change relies upon HR. You know, instead of hiring people based upon a checklist of things that we want them to have, we need to hire based upon cultural fit and attitude so that we're getting the right talent in the organization to begin with. It's a lot easier as we hire people to get the right mindset in the first place than to change their mindsets later on. So there's many obstacles in an organization that needs to be solved. And I think it's critical to get managers and leaders on board the transformation, because there's a lot of processes, there's a lot of incentives, a lot of conflicting things that will get in the way unless we change it. And I absolutely agree that people can do a lot of things to make changes in an organization. But if it isn't supported by management actively understanding what their role is in affecting the change, then people after a while will get very frustrated because they'll keep running into things that aren't really changing. And just for example, even when we start doing sprint planning, that then changes people's mindsets in terms of, okay, as a team, now we're responsible for the planning. And in SAFE, when we do PI planning, it creates a whole new cultural change now. As a team of Agile teams, we're now responsible for estimating our work, for planning our work, for managing our own risks. That's when people start really changing, is when they're supported in doing things in a new way.
Okay. I heard a lot in there. I want to throw it over to Yuta real quick, because again, Yuta, part of what I love is, you are not always on the bandwagon. So metrics, this whole idea, are you for that? Do you believe there's some things we can measure? There's some things we can incentivize, and that's really going to help this whole cultural change along?
Well, the one thing is, I kind of talked about metrics, but in the way of measuring the experiments, if they validate, invalidate the hypothesis, and I think that's really important. In terms of the whole Agile transformation thing, I believe what really needs to be done is that, well, first of all, any kind of metric has to be defined by the person or the group or the whatever thing that will be measured, and not from anyone else. And it doesn't even help if you have management changing this. No, as long as management is changing the way the metrics are, you will always have a negative effect, because people just find their way because they don't find it meaningful. The only thing they find meaningful is, well, I might get a better incentive. That's the one thing. And now coming to the other thing is, as long as whatever we are measuring in terms of where we want to see a different behavior on improvement is coupled with money in any way, incentive or salary or promotion or whatever it is, we will have not really positive effects. So one of the key things is work on separating these two things out, separating which I would call more goals and how you measure, are you on the right track? But this is my personal goal because I want to learn this thing. As long as we have separated that from, okay, there's a reason why I get promoted. Maybe that reason why I get promoted is because our whole product makes more money or we are selling more products. But then this is true for the whole company because there are more people who contribute to that. So that's kind of what I see. There's actually this one thing that what I saw before, well, what Bill was saying, that's the importance of making those experiences. And I think this is really important. It's, for me, a little bit like classic change thing. It's the Kotter stuff, have small successes and then see what led to this success. And therefore people understand and might be more open to try the next thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think part of what I'm hearing in there, and it's a belief I've held, and maybe you guys challenge me on this, is that behavior can change mindset and culture. Right?
Yes, that's why we said culture emerges from that.
Fair enough. And again, sometimes you got to be super obvious for me, Yuta. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Again, part of what I love about that is it's tangible. I don't need to understand a lot about culture change, frankly. I need to understand a little bit. You guys talked about metrics, about what do I measure. I've got to understand some basics of, a lot of us are doing Scrum. How do I do that? Doing those ceremonies, for those of us who do SAFe, PI planning, things like that. Even just coming together and doing that facilitates culture change. You challenged me on that. Lynn, what do you think?
The reference earlier about experiences, how do you help people experience something? And a classic thing I saw recently was a large health organisation, and they were wanting to spread their Agile experience throughout the business. But the people who'd organised this town hall gathering of lots of staff, they'd allocated which tables people would be sitting at. So they were really trying to control the day, control who was sitting at what table at what part of the day. And I said, you know what, let's try self-organising, right? So I'm trying to help them experience something new. Oh, no, it will take too long, it won't work. Anyway, we got through, said, let's just try it, little experiment. And the teams organised, surprisingly, quickly. Of course they did. People went and worked on the topics they wanted to work on. And it was this experience for many of the people, the leaders and a number of other people watching this large group of 70 or 80 people self-organise, that shocked them into going, wow, people will do this. And I don't know how else you could help them experience that, but for them to see it. But for, a facilitation like that. So I love to be able to create that experience and say, let's try it out. Let's see what happens. And if it doesn't work, don't worry, we'll go back to old ways, but we never do. We tried these smaller experiments.
Yeah. Kim, I think I saw a lot of agreement from you there, based on the head nods. You guys experience the same things. Is that something you agree with? What do you guys say? Oops.
Sorry. It's always interesting when leaders are wanting to say, oh, I'm going to spend 3 weeks trying to form these teams, and doing exactly what Lynn said. They are the most knowledgeable about the skill sets that are needed to do the work and the skill sets that they're interested in doing. So in some of our trainings, we actually let them, self-organize, and we just count down just so that they could see how quickly they are self-organizing. So I completely agree with everything that Lynn said. And even in large organizations, getting leaders to kind of let go and then let them experience and see, hey, this actually works, is helpful.
Ask the team members. Again, another like the customer. It's kind of a crazy concept, right? Let me throw it back to Bill and see what else we have from the audience. Bill, we'll throw it back to our panel.
Well, Sheila McGrath had a couple of interesting comments focusing on servant leadership, which is one of my favorite topics. And basically, her comment was a lot of people in her organization really didn't understand what she was doing from a perception of, is this what you call servant leadership, what she was doing? And her comment was, or question was, in most hierarchical companies in the panelists' experience, how do you convince your managers that you'll be recognized and rewarded for basically demonstrating servant leadership kind of behavior? In her experience, if there wasn't a particular crisis moving the pendulum or the needle in this direction or that, how is somebody going to get recognized for doing what is right if their particular culture doesn't typically do that? So I'm just curious to see if any of the panelists have any experience. I have some perspective on it, but you guys are there for a reason, so let's listen to you.
Yeah, we don't want to hear from you, Bill. We got to hear from the panelists. So actually, I think I saw Kim first.
Yeah.
Kim, what do you think?
So we actually had a group of, I'll call them chief product owners. Hopefully people understand what I mean by that. And we were working in a very, very large business. And we got to the point where we were able to rebalance the portfolio on a pretty regular basis. And there were things that came up, and someone had a really great idea. And one of the leaders said, you know what, that thing is more important than the things that my teams are working on. So let's reallocate my team, have them work on the stuff that you just came up with. And instead of that person saying, oh my goodness, I'm going to lose my job, I don't have anything to work on, they actually got promoted. Now, same organization the year before we started to have some of these emerging things that were taking place, there was someone who was delivering a really awesome product with a very small team. And he was told, oh, you can't get to this next role because you don't have enough people on your team. So it's interesting to see just within about a year, the difference in that specific organization, a really large, really old organization.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, again, it sounds like, I'll take it to you, Rich, just one sec. It sounds like, again, the interplay between what we can do at a team level, right, or even an individual level, and how that management support plays in.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, and Rich, I don't know if you can touch on this. It sounded like you wanted to answer, but, you know, part of what the questioner brought up is about risk. It's a little bit risky to jump in and try to be a servant leader, try to change the culture when, you know, maybe it's not something management supports. Is that something you want to comment on?
Yeah, but I do think it's critical to really be clear about what we want our managers to be doing differently. And I was working with this one CIO at an insurance company. And one of the things he said to change his culture, and he met with all of his managers, and he said to them, being a manager is a privilege. And if you want to continue being a manager, then you need to be able to embrace these values and principles and be continuously learning about everything, about our customers, or about our people, and about how to manage. And if you're willing to do that, then fine. If not, perhaps you want to go back to being a practitioner. And he wasn't going to penalize them for you know, in their compensation for doing that, because a lot of people are promoted into management positions because of their expertise as a practitioner, and therefore they're not always the best managers. And management and leadership has a tremendous impact on the organization, and we really need to learn how to be servant leaders and to really, we're there to serve people. We're to help them get their job done. It's a completely different mindset. And a lot of people just don't know how to what that mindset really means. So I think it does come back to coaching and mentoring and training so that people understand what they need to do. It's very unfair to hold them to a standard when they don't really know what these words mean.
Fair enough. Let me ask you about that. Thoughts. What's your experience on that?
I can't add a lot to that. So I also think it's about being transparent what effect it has, and then inviting that manager repeatedly so that the manager sees what's going on, against transparency, and then kind of, yeah, it's again the easy small successes and the quick wins. So pointing those out in order to make the point. So I think I don't add anything new to what has been said.
All right. Well, fair enough. Well, let me ask you guys, before we move on, I'll come back to Bill in a second. I do want to make sure we hit something pretty tangible. We talked about metrics. We talked about some things we probably don't want to incentivize, maybe through money. We talked a lot about metrics around the customer. In your experience, and Lynn, why don't we start with you? Are there some things that you've seen clients, businesses measure that really supercharged maybe their drive to change culture?
Yeah, I think what I've seen work really well is that teams actually being clear about what they're working on. And it sounds like a simple thing, but let other people know what they're working on. And so there's this kind of commitment to certain priorities that they actually get working on. So the contrast is when they start working on something and then, oh, our priorities have changed. Now we have to do something else. And no one can kind of keep up with who's working on what were you working on then? So something as simple as letting other people in your area know what you're working on. was one thing that a team was doing, and that was helping them connect with other departments, trying to get across some of those silos that were existing. This was in a very dry, dated, archaic government department. So this was a big deal. This was a big change for them. Sounds simple.
Our government departments over here are not dry and archaic. I'm sure that's just in Australia. Kim, let me ask you about that, because that sounds a lot like interrupts, right? You know, and I don't know if you guys measure that, but you know what I took from what Lynn said is they made things clear, and then they looked at how often are we interrupted, and maybe that's something worth measuring. What do you think?
Absolutely. I actually have an example. I had a plant manager and a team who was supporting a manufacturing plant. And the plant manager kept saying, well, you guys aren't ever getting anything done that I asked you to get done. I've told you these are the priorities. So just by allowing the team, as Lynn said, to say, here are the priorities that you've given us, and then here are all of these ankle biter things that you keep interrupting us with. This is why we're not getting done the top 3 things that you've asked us to get done, because you keep saying, hey, this is something important. And just by saying, are these things really more important than these things that you told us were your top 3 important things, really helps with, you know, changing that mindset and then getting the plant manager to go away. And that was one Scrum Master on one team in a manufacturing setting, not even in an IT setting. So yes, capture that information, make it visible. And when somebody interrupts, go and say, hey, is this really more important than this other stuff?
Excellent.
And sometimes it is.
Of course. Rich?
Yeah, I think that something we haven't talked about, I absolutely agree that a culture emerges, but I also think that there are things that we can do to accelerate that culture that we want to emerge. First of all, we have to know what are our values? What is our mission as a company, as a team, as a group? We really need to understand that and make sure that we have alignment on this in the first place. And once we understand those values and the vision that we're putting out there, that creates a lot of intrinsic motivation for people then to change. And that's what we need to do. We need to unlock the intrinsic motivation of knowledge workers and get rid of monetary incentives, which actually cause people not to cooperate. So it's often getting rid of the problem and getting rid of the metrics, which create the wrong behaviors. Metrics are a very tricky thing. Because incenting the right behaviors based on metrics is very difficult. And there are a lot of good intentioned metrics, but more often than not, they result in the exact opposite behavior.
Yeah.
So we got to get rid of those incentives. And we also know from people like Daniel Pink in many studies that people aren't motivated by, knowledge workers at least, are not motivated by monetary rewards. But we have to pay people enough to take the issue of money off the table so people aren't thinking about the money and then not cooperating because, okay, I won't get any credit for that, and therefore I won't get the money that I need to take care of my family.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me say, I know we're getting short on time. I want to throw it over to Yuta for some last words and then check in with Bill. Yuta, anything you want to add?
Yeah, so that was a great summary from Rich. And I want to emphasize again that I think it's important that the person group that's got measured defines the metric. And it's not somebody else, because that makes the whole difference. If I want to know, I want to improve on this and that, and I think about how I can measure if I do or not, and if I'm on the right track, this is a completely different game than if you decide I should get better at whatever, that's just why, right? So that's for me a key difference.
I love that, and that's maybe a good message to get out on, is that individual empowerment. Again, it's not just about your leadership. You can help define some things and maybe do it on small scale and push that up. So I know we're out of time. Out of respect for everybody, I'll say one of the things we will do for all of those of you who did ask questions and didn't get them answered, we will throw those to our panelists and see if they do have time. If there's some that they can answer after the fact, we'll be happy to post those. And some of you have asked about whether a copy of this video will be made available. Absolutely. As soon as we clean it up, we will let you know through the email address you registered for the event for when it is ready. And Bill, any closing words from you?
No, I just want to thank the panelists and thank all the people who took time today. There's one particular question that we definitely will want to answer after the fact that Barry asked about: how do you introduce Agile into a government PM culture? You know, that Dave, you would actually be qualified to answer, but we'll get to it. But again, I think this is a great interplay, and just the key message I think that we're all trying to leave with everyone is you as an individual can make a difference. It's your passion, your decision to own something and run with it can make a huge impact within your organization. Don't let anybody stop you from trying, because you can affect
it. Coming to empower you, you're already empowered.
Fantastic.
That's well said.
I'll echo Bill's sentiment. Thank you to our panelists. You know, whether you got up in the middle of the night to come to this or not, fantastic. And we will be in touch with a video recording. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Have
you.
a great day.
Thank you. See you.
Take care, guys.